I presume that people here in the room don't need the words for the three refuges, but I do have copies up front, and those of you online, it's there in the chat if you need the words. Also, the link for donating to the center is there in the chat as well. So let's begin our program tonight, our last of our 4-week spring course on the three refuges, by chanting the three refuges nice and slow together in community. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. What is it that is of real value that's here and now? And for some of us, it might mean overcoming the seductiveness of doubt and any of our arrogant certainty that there isn't anything here that's worthy of refuge, worthy of devotion, of respect. And one way to remember and uncover and have a more direct sense of what might be worthy of our confidence and our faith is just to remember these capacities, the heart's capacity to let go, to be generous, to be content. And just exploring directly in your own experience now this capacity to abandon discontentment, to allow craving, whatever you might be craving, just allowing that to cease through not feeding it. We're realizing that we can let all of our "if only, then I'll be happy," all of those patterns of wanting to become somebody, we can just let them cease. And what remains is contentment with the way it is. A non-greed, a willingness to let go of, because we could pick up one of those promises, "if only, then I'll be happy," but we can let them be, not pick them up. And there's the intention of kindness. In the same way that we wish for our own safety and well-being, realizing that all the beings I know, they have the same wish for safety and well-being and peace. So just as I wish this for myself, may all beings, myself included, realize real safety and ease, peace and well-being. And just noticing in a simple way how kindness is a real refuge. This capacity we have to wish well for ourselves, to wish well for others, to not wish any harm upon ourselves or others, but instead to be willing to be full of care, tender-hearted, so that we don't, by mistake or through lack of attention, cause harm. And in early Buddhism, these are called the three wise intentions: the intention of renunciation or generosity, the intention of kindness, and the intention of non-harming, or you could call it compassion. Caring enough to pay better attention so I don't harm myself or others. Just keeping these intentions in mind, not so much the thought, but let the thought of these three intentions, to be generous, open-hearted, to be kind, this loyalty to non-harming. Basically, we're learning to align with this goodness and to sense it here and now, and to sense it as a refuge, a kind of protection. And realize that maybe we can abide here. Keep it in mind. And instead of thinking that I have to take refuge in this goodness, remember we talked about this last week, this twist from Thich Nhat Hanh, just that sense that this goodness is willing and able to take refuge in our heart. Wanting to express itself right here in ordinary ways in our heart, in our mind and body. These intentions to let go in a generous way, to be kind and to be full of care. And just let it express itself here and now. Keep it in mind and keep it in mind. And keep keeping it in mind. And let this be our meditation tonight. So we'll continue in silence now for a while. We have faith in this refuge. Goodness is available. Let's help ourselves by keeping it in mind, keeping it in mind, keep keeping it in mind, and learning to abide. So it doesn't even feel like it's hard work to keep it in mind. It's more about alignment and trusting and eventually abiding in this goodness. It's both healing directly, immediately, and even more importantly, it's a beautiful gift all around. And we sense that. It's not an idea, but it's a real sense, a visceral sense of goodness all around. And this goodness doesn't have a problem with negative thoughts or pain in the body or whatever else might show up. It knows how to respond and to be with and to include. Keeping goodness in mind. So again, the Buddha, our teacher, tells us there's a refuge here and now. And the question is there a sincere interest in our heart and humility to listen and to open and check it out? And we're given some clues, right? It's about how the mind can relate to the experience of the present moment. So not so much the sensations in our body or the thoughts that are moving through the mind, but how we relate. There's a way of relating that is truly trustworthy and actually beautiful and healing and onward leading in the direction of more and more freedom. So it's something that can be directly sensed, experienced, just like we can definitely experience a hellish experience if we're reacting, being overly controlling or whatever. Things can get really tight. And it can become very clear, this is not the way. This is not a refuge, the way my mind is relating. And now for the last minute or two, just see if it's available, this movement of gratitude for the refuge that's here and now. And it's okay to personalize it if that helps you connect. We'll take a moment and adjust the body, stretch a little, and maybe Will, if you wouldn't mind turning the top two lights up. Thank you, Will. And nice to be with everybody tonight. Finishing up our study of the three refuges. And I think the most important thing, as we begin to reflect tonight, and there'll be time for a large group discussion or questions later in the evening. But to just keep remembering that all the ideas that we've talked about, some more analytical, some more poetic, the images that we have, statues. Some of you know, if you've spent time in Buddhist monasteries, there's incessant bowing that goes on, not just the Anjali gesture, but getting down on your knees, putting your head on the floor, doing that 3 times. And, for us, it wasn't that long ago, people like myself raised in the Catholic Church. There's a lot of things that are not so different than that. But it's just interesting whether we ever here in the West pick up some of those devotional gestures that exist in the East. It still begs the question, where do we feel that sincere movement in our hearts, of gratitude and respect, that we're willing to get down on our knees and put our head on the ground, or something that has the same emotional quality that, bowing down does. And it's just interesting to look at that because, we don't have to do it in public. It would be just an interesting experiment if everyone had their own private room and all of you online could shut your videos off for 10 minutes and the people here in the space would give you each your own little cell and you would just experiment what is it that my heart feels devoted to, really cares about, really appreciates. And it could be your kindergarten teacher comes to mind, or your dog. It doesn't matter, but just so if you really feel that gratitude, that devotion, then prove it. Like, how can you act it out in some way, And for us in the West, it might be being sort of socially awkward, like, being a relatively new culture, we don't have these rituals so clearly spelled out, So we might hem and haw, but we might say, I'm so glad you're in my life, or I'm so glad you were there when I was a kindergartner, and you made me feel safe. And whatever legacy of that relationship with my kindergarten teacher, whatever it is for you, that's alive, that's here and now. It's not a memory about my dog or my kindergarten teacher or my whatever. I had this experience very powerfully. When was that? It was in the early 80s when I was sort of getting started with my practice, and there was a teacher that was inspirational for me. He had already died. I never met him. But I met several of his students that then became teachers. And I have sort of this devotional personality. So I was feeling that. It was late at night. There's a retreat I was at in Santa Barbara, meditation yoga retreat. And I was lying on the grass, looking up at the stars late at night, and just feeling this devotional energy. And this is sort of related to what Mary brought up last week in the email, and then I forwarded that out to the group, about the Buddha takes refuge in me, right? And so it was this like externalizing the refuge in this person, who I never met, was already dead. But just that was the habit of the mind. And then it just sort of like was an insight. It was like, well, whatever I'm imagining, that goodness that I'm imagining, I can't imagine goodness. I can only imagine goodness here. So that goodness is here, whatever I'm imagining, right? It's not out there. It's here. And it's hard to put in words exactly, but it was that realization that the only refuge that's relevant is the refuge that's here and now, that's accessible here and now. And that's where we have to look. And all the forms, all the gestures, it's like some of you know Ajahn Chandako, because he would be a regular visitor for a number of years, a Buddhist monk who grew up in Minnesota. And he was the abbot of a monastery in New Zealand for a number of years, and outside of Auckland. And they built this huge stupa. It's a traditional Buddhist and they put jewels and all kinds of, things inside the stupa, and then they seal it up. It's got, it's just what human culture does over the centuries. They create all these elaborate things that you do with something that's really special. And there's all this stuff about the relics of these awakened ones, including maybe even the Buddha. And I'm not putting it down, and I'm not selling it as some kind of objective truth. But the point is, like, we may never do that here in Minnesota at a retreat center or here in our city center. But we don't want to boo-hoo these things. We want to be really pragmatic about, well, what symbols, what reminders does my heart actually need? And then we want to go out and establish those rituals, those habits, those routines, those reminders. Why wouldn't we? And so it isn't a question of, oh, we'll never do that. The question is, what can I do to keep what I really need to keep in mind? What can I do to help me keep what I should keep in mind, to keep that in mind? And why aren't I doing it? And in a way, this building, which some of you may not know, was a really, really, really greasy 1950s diner. I was telling somebody the other day, when we bought it in 2006, it had this big neon sign. I mean, it must have been 8 feet by 6 feet. And it was a hamburger was the body of this man. And then, it had a head on top of the hamburger and arms out. And I forget exactly what the words that were printed on the hamburger man, but something like steaks, burgers, fries, or something like that. It listed 3 or 4 kind of traditional American diner dishes, and the words family diner. I was there too. I have a picture of it somewhere. We have a picture of it somewhere. But, we collectively rallied a lot of resources. No, not that many bigger gifts. It was just a lot of smaller gifts to buy this place. And then we spent a lot more money renovating it than we did purchasing it, including the whole yard was all parking lot. There was no garden space at all. It was all asphalt. Dug it up, a lot of work. Ripped off the stucco. It was all pink, of all things. Pink stucco. And then a brighter pink wood trim around. And even the asphalt roofing shingles had a pinkish color to them. It got your attention. And but in a way, this building and the people, like when we see each other in this building, it's kind of like our stupa, our equivalent of building a big marble stupa, or some of them in like the Suoyomen, no, what is it called? I'm forgetting the big temple in Rangoon that I've visited. It's huge. And I think they must do like gold leaf or something to make it shine, have that golden shine. And it's huge. I mean, it's a hike to walk around it. And there's like all these little statues and bigger statues. I mean, it's so ornate and so huge and has been revered, as a symbol for the local people for so long. And we don't want to boo-hoo those things. We just want to understand, well, how does that work for me? What works for me? What serves that same purpose for me? And Thich Nhat Hanh, he's such a wonderful creative teacher, and he makes this point about how Sangha might very well be the next Buddha. The capacity we have to create wholesome community. And you might sense like how being here or being online together, it brings out qualities that maybe don't come out in other places in our lives. And I was thinking about this tonight. I mean, I'm sort of speaking to the choir, but tonight is a good example. I don't know how many people signed up for the course, but I think it was around 180 between the online people and the in-person people. But you can see, whether you're online or in the building, that number fades. And it's like we create these outward symbols and supports together, and we're responsible for, not that big numbers matter, but commitment and loyalty, like, because we care. No, I mean, now people get sick and they have family obligations or work that they can't get out of, so it's always okay to miss a class. But what's not okay for these sort of things is like when you can be here, to choose not to be here, right? Because we're kind of dependent on each other. I mean, other classes, at the center are just drop-in. You can come or go as you want. But things like the Buddhist studies class, we purposefully say, you got to be all in, because you can always watch it later, or you can go on the YouTube channel and just watch it anonymously. So you don't have to make that commitment. And you're not making that commitment for me. We're making that commitment for each other, because it changes things when we're all in together. Just like when we go on a retreat and we build this community for those 4 days or that 9 days or however long the Buddhist retreat is that you're doing, and we have this sort of commitment to each other that, as best as we can, we're going to follow this schedule and we're going to treat each other kindly with respect, and we're going to close doors quietly so we don't disturb each other, and we give each other permission to be together in this supportive social environment, but not to have to talk with each other. So then I don't have to convince you who I am, and you don't have to convince me who you are. We give each other a break on that level until the social meal at the end of the retreat, and then it's sort of, that can kick in on steroids again. But still, for that period of time, it's a beautiful, we really create something that has real spiritual beauty. And it moves people. You can, if you haven't been on a retreat or even a day-long retreat, there's a real strong feeling like, it's hard to put it into words, but it always seems silly when you say, there's something really special here. And then we'll kind of wrongly project it onto the teacher or onto this or onto that, but it's something that we created together. And that it's an external thing that actually is pointing to something that's here and now. It isn't actually the community or the building or the teachings or the teacher. It's something, the refuge is here and now. Otherwise, it's not a refuge. But it's interesting how arrogantly we can believe in times, nah, it ain't here. It's just, oh, poor me here, or confused me, or me full of doubt, and it's just interesting how we tend to swing from grandiosity, where we wrongly interpret what's beautiful as something that I have or own, or we wrongly presume there's nothing that is a refuge. And that's our practice. And it's a very personal practice, but it really works best when we do this in community, because we can, we're creatures that sympathetically resonate with each other. Just like if we hang around a lot of greedy or a lot of angry people, we kind of start to sympathetically vibrate with everyone there. And if we start hanging out with people who are interested in this refuge of, and it's not about the words, right? Buddha, this inherent potential or capacity to be awake, that clarity, that capacity for that stability of present moment awareness that can be intimate, that can see clearly the way it is, not be confused by experience, Dhamma, and that can respond from that place of intimacy creatively without needing a plan, but just being connected in that really ongoing, refreshing way, just responding. That there's a great little story in Buddhism, Wei Min, I think it's pronounced something like that. One of the great Zen patriarchs, Chan is the word in Chinese for what later became Zen when it went to Japan. And Chan is actually related to the word samadhi, interestingly. But anyway, it was a movement in Buddhism in China. And one of the great patriarchs, more respected teachers, I forget when it started in China, but pretty early, maybe 6th century CE, something like that. Somebody once asked him, a student once asked him, what did the Buddha teach? But say it in a couple words, sum it up. What did the Buddha? And he had this great, I thought, brilliant response that just came probably from the depth of his understanding. He responded with a phrase that gets translated like this: an appropriate response. Right? So, and it's really, I think, a nice way of talking about Sangha, Sangha is that appropriate response, but it's not the same as me or you trying to do it right, trying to show up right, and putting pressure. I mean, it can feel that way at times, but it's a natural response, an appropriate response, precisely because we're not trying to be, the one who does it right. We're just being connected, deeply, intimately connected with all things that are here and now. And so whatever we do is going to come out of that depth and breadth of being connected. And even if there is the mark, the sort of more little boy who wants to please adults, in me, if that conditioning has been activated, that depth and breadth of awareness, of intimacy, will know that. Oh yeah, that's just that old lineage of having been a little boy, raised the way I was raised, who thought, the way to be safe is to please adults, and I kind of have that in me too. And we can see that. We don't have to be afraid. Like, all the pieces together is what leads to an appropriate response in the moment. I don't have to condemn that part of my conditioning. You don't belong. You're just going to muck it up. I want a sophisticated response, or I want, a not self response in the moment. Not, I don't need that personal conditioning. Well, that's just more of that sticky self-view, isn't it? And you can probably tell, as we've talked about all three of the refuges these last 4 weeks, I've been talking, and you've probably been thinking and discussing in your small groups and with your friends in different levels. We talk about it in the outer forms, the Buddha, like that person who lived 2,500 years ago, who evidently was quite wise and quite able to articulate the spiritual path in a way that even so many years later is useful, functional for us. So that's an external representation. And then there's the internal, like, what does the Buddha, that person, represent for me here and now? Oh yeah, like that sublime presence, intimacy with conditions, ease, non-fear with conditions, right? So that's what we have to, it's like those symbols aren't forced on us. We creatively use these symbols. We get to participate and if you don't like it, if it isn't working for you, then change it, how these symbols operate in your heart and your mind. Throw out the Buddha, the word, the image, the whatever, and use something else. You could write on your bedroom wall, openness, and you could bow down to that word. That, I was going to say, sumi painting, where the brush painting in Japan, but that might smack you as being a little, appropriating the artistic style of a Buddhist culture. So, you might want to do it with a spray can and, whatever, a little graffiti. That's more our culture. So however you want to do it, it doesn't matter. What matters is, like, we need help remembering, and we have these external things, and we have our kind of internal, like how we're working with it, the working ground, which is a play of our concepts, our ideas, and our actual experience. Like, so we would call this in Buddhist terms wise thought, right? Where we're using thought in a way to direct presence to the way it is. Not thoughts that lead to more thoughts, but thoughts that lead to a more direct and immediate opening to what's here and now. So we have the external representation, we have this internal working, chewing on it, contemplating, reflecting. What do these symbols point to that's here and now, right? So that's kind of an active, and then that sets up insight. And this is how the Buddha talks about wisdom. There's this sort of outer level where somebody tells us something, or we collectively build a temple that reminds us of something, or we've got a community that we work on keeping it healthy and having our shared values in that community. But however, we have the external that supports the internal contemplation, which supports insight. And insight is realizing in a way that's uncontrived and unprovoked and not personal. We realize what the word Buddha points to. And that insight, that realization then leaves an impression on the mind stream, and if it's a deep insight, it's hard to lose that impression. It's hard to forget it, because the impression is like an indelible impression. Oh. It's like, too, if we have had enough moments in our sitting or just daily life where we've touched into calm and tranquility, after a while, it's hard to forget that calm and tranquility. Even when our day is like totally crazy, it's like there in the background of the mind is, yeah, but there's calm and tranquility. It's not like it goes away. It's sort of there waiting. Some of you probably can sense that right now. Like, is the stillness you sometimes abide in your meditation, is that someplace else? Or is it still or always here and now? And the non-fear that we sometimes experience in our life, is that gone away or is it here and now? Can it be accessed? Same with love, metta. Basic goodness, basic friendliness, is it accessible? Maybe it's faint, maybe it's distant, but it's still like that potential is here. It's just not currently being remembered or respected, so that we're keeping it more in the forefront. There's a passage in the early tradition where after you would do the refuges, the traditional form of the refuges, then you would say something like, thus may you know me. From this day forward, thus may you know me. So whether, again, you use the traditional formulation, but imagine like a really dear friend or a teacher or mentor of yours, and you would see that person from time to time, and it's like a confession, but in a good sense. You go to the person and you'd have to reveal what is it in your life that is you're sensing is a true friend, a true refuge, something you're willing to place your heart upon or bow down to. So you'd share that to them, and then you'd always end, like maybe you do this once a month or once a year with your teacher or your friend or whatever, to yourself, and then you'd end always by saying, from this day forward, thus may you know me. Like, when you see me, I want you to be able to sense that this is alive in me. Whether we're playing pickleball together or we're having lunch, but that somehow the quality of Buddha, the quality of Dhamma, the quality of Sangha is here and can be recognized. And Sangha especially is an interesting quality, this appropriate response. Let me just read a little bit about what people have said about Sangha. Often, we'll tag on the phrase when we say, I take refuge in Sangha. One of the traditional phrases, at least, is those who know the way. So that's why the Buddha or the monastic community of nuns and monks or teachers. So it's more than just like a Buddhist community. It's somebody in the Buddhist community who, at least in moments, shows us the way. Oh, the way Ryan was so generous. We saw him act or do something, and he was modeling the way. Just that being good, but being good in an easeful way. Yeah, I'm just using you as an example, Ryan. I do think you're good, though. But, and that's sort of nice, actually, because, for someone like me, I have more of a critical mind, so I tend to see what's off. And it's especially good for those of us who have more of a critical mind to get in the habit of noticing who shows us the way. We had our staff meeting on Monday morning that we have had now for a long time. And I was at home, and Shelley and Robin were here, and we were on Zoom together. And I was thinking, we always do a little Dharma reflection at the beginning of our weekly staff meeting. And I thought I'd just turn my camera, because my cat was just sitting not too far from me, and it was just in this beautiful repose, just so relaxed, and and it's a little sunny spot, but I think he doesn't want the sunshine in his eyes, so he has his front paw or front leg over his eyes, and it's oh yeah, in that moment, that little thing, manifesting non-fear, when an animal is willing to be so unguarded, so undefended. That's a little Dharma teaching, right? And it kind of can be a symbol for what armor, what defensiveness, tightness can be released. Maybe it's not so needed right now. Maybe I don't need to be afraid or guarded or tight right now. There are moments I might need that, but in this moment, oh yeah, thanks for showing me the way. Sangha, so happy to see you, or we see Wynn, my partner, a good friend, was visiting this last weekend, and she does this healing work, and she did some healing work on Wynn, and Wynn walked out of that session with our good friend, and Wynn's energy was just so settled and so clear, and her eyes just deep pools. How people's eyes sometimes can be, what do we say in English sometimes, a window into the soul, right? But there's something about Buddha that sometimes we see through people's eyes, like nobody's home, just pure presence. But it's you don't find the guy or a person who's present, you just sense sometimes in these deep pools we see in people's eyes, pure, non-fearful presence, or love sometimes too, right? And just seeing that for a few moments, right? It was just a moment of Sangha. Oh, someone's showing me the way. That empty, pure presence, that capacity is here too. Whatever I'm sensing, whatever I'm knowing, I can only know because I've sensed it, felt it, known it here. Right? We don't recognize what we don't know. So when you see something beautiful, that knowing of the beauty or the goodness or whatever it is here and now. It's not actually out there. In a real sense, subjective sense, there isn't really anything out there. Maybe there is, but we only know what's here and now. So when I see my partner or see my cat or whatever it is, see somebody doing something really generous, but in a really relaxed and uncontrived way, not trying to be generous, but just giving freely in a natural way, it's the heart recognizes something. To know that that's beautiful is because the heart knows that that's beautiful. And that's that's how we use the external, and we go all the way. In Tibetan Buddhism, they call that insight the secret. So there's the external, the internal, and then the secret refuge is, it doesn't involve any self, right? Because the internal, as I was talking about, is when we're really working it. We're still the individual practitioner, but we're kind of in the hunt. We sense that it's here and now, but we're still feeling obliged to do the spiritual work, right? We're still a practitioner practicing. And the secret is just another way of talking about insight, where there's a sense of that refuge as a real living thing that's not self. And that's not a problem, right? Because it just means it's freely available. It isn't about you or me deserving it, which is really fortunate, right? Because on this more self level, we're just messy. We don't really deserve anything. We're just greed, hatred, and delusion, and a few other things in the mix. And that's okay, because we're just a bunch of animals carrying the legacy of so much ignorance and pain and suffering and meanness, right? That's what we are. We're just the continuation of all of that. And of course there's goodness there too. But the real freedom is having a sense of what else is here and now. When the mind isn't, out of habit, clinging to these conditions, the conditions of our personality, the conditions of our world, and trying to get something from these conditions that it can never deliver. So this is the thing about the secret, the insight, the deeper experience of the refuge is we can't be there in that normal sense of the word when the insight is there. It really requires that kind of submission, that commitment, that loyalty. That's why there's so many, not just in Buddhism, but when you look at the bigger field of spiritual, religious teachings, practices, rituals, they can be somewhat extreme or provocative. But they're just different, some of them at least are clever, useful, functional ways of dropping what needs to be dropped. It's like to go on a longer retreat, and to sit many hours a day and to walk back and forth many hours a day. It's like, it's such a abomination to oneself. It's like, you're going to make me do... But it's actually no problem for nature. But to carry that sense of a me who's got to sit for another hour and then has to walk back and forth for an hour and then has to sit for another, whatever the length of the sit is, and then do walking and then do sitting practice, it's like the self won't do it. But that's fine, because, well, you don't have to be here. And that's the thing about, like, even being with the next breath. Because it's the self, it's just the habit energy. No, I want to think about something exciting. Even if it hurts, like dredge up some old pain. But the last thing I want to do is something boring, like being with the next breath in or the next breath out. So there's all these different spiritual forms, but they're ultimately they're just different ways to go from the external, which can be a ritual too, like breathing in and out. That's an external form that allows us to learn and see something, which sets up a realization. So this is from Ajahn Amaro. He's a British Buddhist monk. He wrote once, or it was an interview actually, where he said, "The Sangha, on an external level, is the community of awakened disciples. On the internal level, It is that quality of relationship which arises when the awakened heart sees the way things are. Taking refuge in Sangha is taking refuge in our capacity to act and speak harmoniously in a way which is virtuous, noble, and good. Putting your heart into that which is noble and pure in a complete way. Or I think it was Pema Chodron who said, not holding back as a definition of refuge. Like, because we feel that connection and that grateful connection, we don't hold back. We're all in. And then in the same interview he said, refuge in Sangha doesn't mean hanging out with the local Buddhist group. On an external level, it would be spending time with those who are awakened, the bright lights of the world. But on an internal level, hanging on to Dhamma books doesn't actually stop you from suffering. Hanging out with the local Buddhist group, or even hanging out with wise beings, doesn't stop you from suffering. But at that moment where the heart chooses to act out of purity, out of nobility, what comes forth is absolutely free from suffering. It is completely delightful, joyful, dependable. And I know it can seem like a lot of work, to align with what's good, because it always feels like, okay, we're herding sheep or cats or something like that, because we have all these tendencies to want to check my email or look at the news or eat food or get even with somebody but then I've got to be Sangha. I'm taking refuge in Sangha. I'm supposed to be like this, and it can be this huge burden. But remember, the whole path is really about aligning with nature. It doesn't mean our angry tendencies, that's nature too, but we're aligning with nature in a way that it has that sort of clean or fresh or light or beautiful quality to it. And it's, we can go the other way. Like sometimes, we even use that phrase sometimes, don't we? That person, they're a force of nature. They're a piece of work, or they're a force of nature. And it could be a real demonic person, like somebody who's just like totally full of themselves and totally full of neurotic tendencies. But it's almost like they're not doing it. It's like, and they can actually, those people can have a lot of charisma. You can probably think of a few people like this. Because they're not, there's always a few of them, and they tend to be people who are known, right? Celebrities or politicians or whatever. And they're so in the groove of their conditioning that there's no friction. People have probably heard me say this, but I felt that way. I kind of, was starting to pay attention to politics when Ronald Reagan was president, and even before, when he first ran in the 70s and didn't win. And I wasn't a supporter of Ronald Reagan, but I was impressed by his his kind of easeful confidence, right? Because he believed what he said, and it's compelling when someone, just like it sort of shows when someone's saying something because they want to have an effect on us. We can kind of read it a little bit that I'm being manipulated. Someone's saying that because they're looking for a response. It's so much more powerful if you can actually believe what you're saying. It's compelling. And but because we're basing our whole path on this opening, and that opening has both a sensitivity, a depth, but also a real breadth, then that won't work for us, being the demonic type, right? So because we're orienting around sensitivity, then naturally will gravitate towards freedom, towards no friction, towards what's releasing. Because the feedback of the sensitivity draws us into that place, draws the life, the body and the mind, or whatever this is, it draws it, it's what we call in Buddhism onward leading. And that's the real definition of the refuges, is they have an onward leading quality. So from our personal point of view, it feels really hard to be a Buddhist, because we got to have that continuity of present moment awareness. That's not easy. Be intimate with everything that's here, both in terms of the great breadth of what's showing up in the moment, but the subtlety of what's here and now. That's a big ask. And then I got to be Sangha. I've got to be expressing this goodness in every possible way, fluently, nimbly, meeting each moment perfectly, with the appropriate response. And it appears to us as this heavy load. But our work is really about how do we align so that becomes more and more effortless. That's actually the flavor the only flavor we can trust in our spiritual lives, our practice. Is there a sense of it being onward leading, like it becomes second nature, it becomes natural, like there's a feedback loop. And it's interesting when you get your first sit, where you see that there's enough continuity of presence, mindful awareness, and it starts to have its own momentum. And even when there's an off-ramp to worry about this, it's like you just see it get like, oh, that's just the next thing being known. It's like everything is just fuel for Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So whatever neurotic habits we have, or crazy stuff that's happening around us and the people we're around, or this situation we're around, all of it just gets turned back into Buddha, the next thing to be awake to, Dhamma, the next thing to be intimate with, to feel as it actually is, and Sangha, that sort of appropriate response that just effortlessly arises because of being intimate, being connected. And awareness is just knowing. It's like gets described sometimes as a free fall. And that's that sense of effortlessness. The goodness is effortless in the sense of how we're responding, and the awareness is effortless, and the understanding, like connecting with Dhamma the way it is, and the understanding, how the mind comprehends, that's all effortless. And then we really have a maturing sense of what liberation is. It's like it's all happening on its own. It's not a burden. The freedom doesn't belong to anybody, but it makes it even more beautiful and appealing to the heart, because it removes a burden we didn't even realize we had. Like, to be free can be a burden. To be somebody who has to be free or has to be awakened or whatever. So this is from Ajahn Sumedho. So the refuge of Sangha is a very practical refuge for day-to-day living within the human form, within this body, in relationship to the bodies of other beings and the physical world that we live in. When we take this refuge, we do not act in any way that causes division, disharmony, cruelty, meanness, or unkindness to any living being, including ourselves, our own body and mind. This is being one who practices well. And a little later, Sangha is the society or the community of virtuous ones who are practicing, who are using wisdom, who are contemplating the truth. When you take refuge in Sangha, you're no longer taking refuge in your personality or your individual abilities, but in something greater than that. And we kind of do this in different places in our life. Like even, I don't know if you've been watching some of the basketball. I caught some of the earlier games in the tournament a couple of weekends ago. But there's something like we feel sometimes in team sports, like something starts to happen that's greater than the individual set of skills or talents that we have in the group. And we see that in how people sometimes respond in difficult circumstances, like something comes forward and it can even surprise ourselves. I mean, I see that actually sometimes in giving Dharma talks. It's like, oh, that was really helpful. I'm really glad I heard that. I mean, it's like, it didn't feel like, oh, I planned to say that. But something came forward that was like, oh, that was really good to hear, good to be reminded of. Or you see yourself responding to a friend in need or whatever, and it just has that quality of Sangha. And it's really nice to see that it's not personal. It's beautiful, and it's not personal. And it can be confusing because in one moment it can be feeling very free and real and not personal. But in the next moment, it's just like in an instant, it can feel, there could be a lot of pride or a lot of self-centeredness, like me wanting it to continue. And like we ruin it. Because Sangha isn't something we do. It's something we recognize when it's there. When our activity, what we're thinking, what we're saying, what we're doing, is just arising naturally and somewhat effortlessly out of being intimate, being present, being connected. And then if there is some self-centeredness that says, I like this is good, which is totally appropriate, that kind of thought would arise, well then wisdom can just say, well, yeah, okay, well what made this happen? What supported this? Oh, being intimate, being really open and present and fearlessly aware of how it is. And that allowed for that. And it can be frustrating when we're in that place in practice where there are moments where we feel some of that momentum, where things are just sort of happening on their own. We just feel like we're responding relatively skillfully in all the different situations as we navigate the day, but not so heavy like I'm doing it. And but it's like, but we can't own it. That's the thing. We can't own the refuges because they're not personal. But we can align with them. And that's really the practice of taking refuge, is we're aligning. That's why we do things like accessing devotional energy, because initially from our normal egoic point of view, we have to submit that to something that's bigger. It's not external, but we kind of do this. We make it seem as if it's external. But the reason we do that is it's beyond the limitations of this personality. But that doesn't mean it's out there any more than it's in here. It's just not this limited, self-centered personality. It's not that. So when we, if you do like bowing, or whatever you do to express your sincere devotion to what's not this limited personality, right? You have to, you're sort of setting up a willingness to say yes, because you don't say no to the personality, you say yes. I like the word nature, that's what I say, more than Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. We say yes to nature, or yes to the way it is, and that allows the dropping of the identification with what's limited. We don't personally need to drop the attachment to self. That's just a setup for more self-centeredness. It's something that's naturally shed when the heart naturally, effortlessly realizes the refuge. because it's here and now. And there's just and like I said, initially it will be kind of moments, and then we lose it. And, and then another moment with a taste of freedom, and then we lose it, and then maybe another one. Of course, there's more to say, but I wanted to save a few minutes just for a couple questions, so maybe I'll leave it here. And people online, of course, you can just raise your digital hand, and people in the room, you can actually raise your hand if you don't mind. Yeah, Sean, do you want to step forward so people can hear you? You can sit right here, Sean, if you don't mind.
So I wanted to bring out one of the qualities of onward leading from my friend Chris Conry, who is running the 100% Clean Energy campaign calls every other Friday. And it's a coalition of like 30, 40 different environmental groups that are all meeting to help move things forward at the Capitol. And he just does a great job of having everybody on the call feeling equally able to move things forward and contributing. So when I was talking with Patrice at one of the rallies at the Capitol, she really believes this idea of a shared agency where everybody is getting to move along the continuum of being more empowered. So I think the Buddha also said, be a lamp unto yourself. So anyway, that's one of the qualities of, for me, that's this fresh air quality of not trying to maintain the power, control yourself, but helping the collective to be empowered. I'm not sure if there's any other Buddhist way of saying that.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Other experiences of Sangha that people want to share, questions that come to mind? Where have you seen Sangha? And that connection from what you're seeing out there and what you're seeing, like just that, a kind of empowerment. Other thoughts that come to mind? Looks like someone online here. Yeah, Chloe, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I guess. So we're kind of talking a little bit about what maybe we've experienced Sangha, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong. But I guess I feel like lately I've been reading a lot about this IFS or internal family systems, and they talk about self very differently than we talk about it here. But reading about it's giving me kind of an experience that I think connects a lot to what we talked about tonight, as far as how I feel like I relate, am relating. I guess that's all I kind of have to say.
Yeah, at least here, Chloe, you broke up a couple times, so I'm not sure we caught everything. Good, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that I've been reading a lot about internal family systems, and they relate to the self in a different way, but I feel like it's given me an experience of Sangha in a similar way to the way we talked about it tonight. It's a mouthful, but
Yeah, thank you. And time for one more. Any other questions or reflections? Yeah, please. That's why I was in amplified.
Okay. So in the last week or so, I feel like Sangha has kind of cracked me open in a couple of different ways. Over the weekend, with the storm, I lost all my power and heat and everything. And and felt incredibly alone, and had a very sad clown kind of response to being in that situation, but was able to think about Sangha and reach out with what little power I had left in my phone to just put a message out to say how lonely I felt. And the response helped me get connected. In another way, I've had a number of people that are very close to me have really devastating health issues lately. And as I've reached toward them, finding that also being present to other people and being open to Sangha can also be really beautiful and painful at the same moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And thank you, everyone, for being part of the Buddhist studies. And just a reminder that we'll have a summer course, 8 weeks, beginning on June 12th. And we'll be doing the divine abodes of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. So that will be our summer class. And I sent along in the email that I sent out yesterday, Steve Hilson's wonderful little short essay on Dana, generosity. Most of you know how the center operates. If not, you can check the website. We're inviting everybody into the circle of giving and receiving. First job is just to receive what's offered, the teachings, all the programs as a free gift. Really let it land in your heart as a free gift, given because of the board and the staff and the teachers deciding to operate in this way. And then just in a way that makes sense in your life, find a way to complete that circle. And of course, we understand that not everybody has money to contribute or hours to volunteer, but there is always a way to have a beautiful circle in all of our relationships, not just your relationship with the center. And this is how the teachers are able to live their lives and pay their bills, and we pay our paid staff, a modest salary, not an extravagant salary by any means, and then take care of our building here and then our retreat center out in Wisconsin. And we'll have our community practice intensive beginning on April 10th, ending on the 29th of April with a day-long retreat. Check it out if you haven't done that. It's a great time to meet people in the community and up your practice for about 19 days. And just with other people in the community, just having a sense of what gets set in motion when you're able to put in a little bit more time sitting every day, or a little bit more time studying, or other aspects of the path. Yeah, and Shelley's going to lead a day-long or half-day retreat this coming Saturday, if you're interested. So much gratitude for coming together, and hope to see some of you during the summer class. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.